Chapter 3. As the plane began its descent, an island about the size and shape of Manhattan appeared in the distance. A thick forest canopy blanketed 3/4 of it to the surrounding shoreline. In the southeast corner of the island, a crescent-shaped area was carved out from the beach, 500 yards into the forest. The sand on the beach gleamed champagne pink in the sun. There were at least 10 large buildings, complete with a road system and marina. An airstrip had been fashioned into the forest beyond that, big enough to handle jumbo jets. "It's got to be Montserrat," Nick said to Andy. She looked at Nick with a small frown and a tilted head. Montserrat was nearly covered by a volcano. "Do you see any mountains or lava layers down there?" "I used to work in the Caribbean on holiday weekends," Andy said. "This place isn't on any map, trust me." "So nobody will know where we are," Nick said. Andy let out a small sigh. "Unfortunately, there are many people who know where we are, just not us." "Well, if you know that, you know a lot more about this place than me." Nick hesitated for a moment, and then he said, "What did you mean before that you worked in the Caribbean on holiday weekends? What the hell kind of a job could that be?" "You're such a child, Nick." "I'm your age." "I wasn't talking about years." Andy finally took off her sunglasses and looked directly into Nick's face, as if she wanted to become part of it. "We're all going to find out about each other sooner or later, so I might as well tell you now. I was an elite, high-end call girl since I was a junior in high school. I serviced only the wealthiest and most politically connected people in the world, all over the globe. I didn't have a pimp, I wasn't forced, and I did it on my own because I liked the money and life. It started with the governor of my state and skyrocketed up from there. I was making $30,000 a night. What people? Men, women. It didn't make any difference to me. I cared only about the money. I lived like a revered queen." Nick tried not to make any facial gestures. "And you gave that up to go to college?" "It was either that or end up dead and buried in the Nevada desert someplace. I was going to out the wife of a very high-ranking American politician because she was way too weird and tried to make me do things I don't like. I wasn't going to rat her out, but they thought I was, so they gave me an ultimatum." "The First Lady?" "She was no lady." "What about you, Nick? What's your story, since we're doing this show and tell now?" "I'm a plumber." Andy turned down the left corner of her mouth. "Sure you were." The pilot's voice came on the PA system. "Fasten your seatbelts. We're about to land." The plane disappeared below the triple canopy of the forest and made a smooth touchdown on the runway. After a short taxi, the jet came to a stop in front of a one-story air terminal. The plane's hatch opened, and Nick and Andy walked into the steaming tarmac. Nick stood squinting into the sun, putting his hand up above his eyes like a visor. Andy donned her sunglasses. The heat did not seem to affect her as she stood there in her thick northern skirt suit. Andy took a cigarette from her purse and lit it, letting out a bored exhale of smoke. Just as she was finishing her smoke, a black two-door BMW convertible pulled up to them. The driver, another 30-something black suit, got out and told the two of them to get in the back seat. He walked to the plane and retrieved their bags. The driver came back with their suitcases, threw them in the trunk, and then got behind the wheel. "I'm taking you to your dorm first. You'll have 45 minutes to get your things squared away, and then meet in Roosevelt Hall for orientation." Before the man put the car's gear in drive, Nick asked, "Are we going to be roommates?" "Oh, Christ," Andy said, hanging her head. "You'll get your room assignments when we get there. I'm not at liberty to answer your questions, but I will say that you two are fortunate people." He looked into the rearview mirror, smiled, and then drove off. Once they made it past the airship, the shimmering ocean was never out of view on the left. The temperature was 84 degrees, and the gentle breeze blowing in from the sea made the air fresh. There were only a few wispy white clouds in the powder blue sky as they hurried past the marina. It was filled with small sailboats, but was otherwise empty of people, except for an armed security guard standing next to a sentry booth at the head of the main pier. There was a main road that ran through the middle of the campus, and the driver slowed down to 15 miles per hour and turned into it. Both Nick and Andy took it all in, their heads turning back and forth to examine the buildings. "Looks like the quadrangle of Penn State or Harvard in miniature," Andy turned to Nick and said. "But the buildings don't have chemistry or physics carved into them. It's the name of dead presidents. Washington, Roosevelt, Lincoln. I wonder why Truman's there." "Probably because he had the guts to drop the bomb," Nick said. "No women, though," Andy said. "Maybe you'll be the first," Nick said. Andy finally smiled. "I don't plan on dying anytime soon." It took only a minute to drive around the quadrangle. The driver was giving them a short tour. Near the end of the quadrangle, the road narrowed and curved off to the left toward a long knoll overlooking the sea, a 7-iron away. It was high enough to avoid a small hurricane storm surge. Except for the quadrangle, the area was like a resort. Situated on the knoll was an immense hotel that looked like it belonged on Miami Beach, complete with 2 swimming pools and 6 tennis courts. Behind the hotel, hidden from the beach by the hill, was a 9-hole golf course cut into the side of a gentle hill slope. The forest began on the other side of the golf course. The driver pulled the BMW under the hotel's portico. He exited, opened the trunk, and put his passengers' bags on the sidewalk. "Register at the front desk," he said. And then he took a long look at Andy. "Hope to see you around campus." "I doubt that very much," Andy said. The man stood there, gawking at her for a moment, before he got into the vehicle and drove off. Andy and Nick picked up their bags and walked into the lobby. Nick slowed his walk and looked around. "This is like a fancy hotel on the French Riviera," Nick said to Andy. "What would you know about it?" she said. "I've stayed in better." "I read," Nick said. "I've got a photographic memory." "You only think you do," Andy said. There were students and other men and women sitting in chairs and couches in the lobby. It seemed their only purpose was to size up the incoming freshman class. Some of them were even taking notes as Nick and Andy walked past them. They dressed casually in khaki pants, polo shirts, and sandals. Some were smoking cigarettes. A few were drinking coffee. 2 of the women had just come in from the pool. Their hair was still wet, and they hadn't changed out of their bathing suits. Only semi-wet wraparounds covered them. They were all speaking in low tones to each other. Nick got to the desk first. Before he could talk, the woman behind the counter said, "Welcome, Mr. Falcone, Ms. McShane." The receptionist wore a black skirt suit and an open white shirt. Her short hair was perfectly styled so that it came to an end symmetrically at the bottom of her earlobes. "I'm Betty. Here are your room keys. All freshmen are on the 4th floor, separate rooms, of course." "Of course," Nick said, staring briefly at Andy. Betty said, "The restaurant is open 24/7. There's a drugstore and shop to the right of the elevators. Everything is free, but they do keep track of what you purchase. Don't worry about that, though. Take whatever you need. Orientation is in 30 minutes in Roosevelt Hall. There are golf carts outside with your names on it, so that you can use it for transportation around the island. I suggest you grab a quick bite of lunch before you leave, because this orientation is rather long. Yours was the last plane to come in." "Thanks, Betty," Nick said. He took his room key and headed for the elevators. Andy followed about 10 feet behind him. The elevator car came, and they both got in. Nick pressed the 4th floor button, and the 2 new students rode up together. "What's the matter?" Nick said. "Great white sharks got your tongue all of a sudden?" "Very funny. This place is not for me," Andy said. "I'm going to find a way to steal one of those boats out at the marina and sail the hell out of this freak show." "Right. Are you going to sail your way off an uncharted island in a Hobie Cat? To where?" "You could end up in Antarctica, and I don't think they have winter clothes here." "Just keep your mouth shut about what I said about myself, and we'll get along fine. I shouldn't have told you that much." The elevator came to a stop, and the door opened. "I'm 404, Nick said. Andy went right, down to the end of the hall. Nick watched her for a moment, and then he turned left to his room. He didn't spend a lot of time checking it out. The room was more substantial than the usual Days Inn. There was a bedroom with plenty of closet space and a bathroom, and a separate living room study with its kitchenette and refrigerator. A wide veranda was on the other side of sliding glass doors, which were partially open, allowing the ocean breeze to blow in the gossamer white curtains in a rhythmic dance. Nick hung up his clothes, put his toiletries away in the bathroom, and then raced back down to the lobby and the restaurant. He was hoping to see Andy there, but the restaurant was empty except for a buffet bar that still had some sandwiches and drinks in it. Nick scooped up a ham and cheese and a Coke and ran outside to find his golf cart parked alone to the right of the portico. His name appeared in print on the side in gold leaf letters. "They even spelled my name right," Nick said to himself. He hopped in the golf cart and headed toward the quadrangle to look for the Roosevelt Hall, while he stuffed his lunch in his mouth with one hand and steered with the other.